Hey, this is Zulem Urbina, and tune into the relay for the latest news in boxing all around the world. Thank you for supporting myself and other female boxers. We truly appreciate it.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. It appears that Russian up-and-comer Tatiana Zrazhevskaya, the WBC's former interim champion in the bantamweight division, will be returning to action later on this month in about 2 weeks' time on the 19th. This will be her first fight since having dropped a decision in September of last year to Mexico's own Jessica Gonzalez. Jessica Gonzalez, who ahead of that fight had a professional record of 7 wins with 5 losses and 2 draws. It's been close to a year since Tatiana Zrazhevskaya has seen action, if you can believe that. She lost that fight in September of last year. She is only now returning to action in August of this year, and in that way, it's a month shy of a full year's time. It's a month shy of 1 calendar year. She's going to be squaring off against Tanzania's own Fatuma Yazidu. Interesting choice, to say the least, for a fighter that hasn't seen action in close to a year's time. Fatuma is a veteran of 26 professional contests, 26 professional bouts, sporting a professional record of 19 wins, 6 losses with 1 draw, 10 knockouts, having been stopped, having been knocked out 5 times throughout her professional career. 5 out of 6 losses ended by way of knockout for Fatuma. Not the greatest of records, but you will notice that she has more than 2 times as many fights as Tatiana Zrazhevskaya. That makes her a more experienced boxer, a more experienced professional, and the danger of that is another Jessica Gonzalez situation, to where the record looks a certain way on paper, but in the ring, but how it plays out in the ring might be something else entirely. Fatuma has campaigned as low as minimum weight to as high as featherweight. Featherweight, that's 126 pounds. Because Tatiana has spent so much time out of action, it's conceivable that her return to the ring may not be a bantamweight contest. It might be a super bantamweight or even a featherweight contest. The fight's not yet registered on BoxRec, so we don't know at what weight these 2 girls are going to be fighting. Tatiana Zrazhevskaya saw action 2 times last year, hasn't fought at all this year, whereas Fatuma was a little busier. She fought approximately 3 times last year and has already seen action 2 times this year. She was last in action in March of this year against Zawadi Kutaka, fought to a draw. Fatuma's record is all over the place. It's a bag of cats. It's a mixed bag. Debutantes, journeywomen with upside-down records, and some good fighters, some decent fighters. But it's the decent fighters, you'll notice, that dished out Fatuma those losses, those 6 professional losses. Good fighters like Anna Krasnoperova, Fabiana Batiki, Leandre Jegels. You get the sense that Fatuma is the kind of fighter that's okay up until a certain level. She's the kind of fighter that loses to any halfway decent fighter she comes up against. As soon as she steps up in class, that's another loss in the column, another loss on her record. That's got to be the logic that Tatiana's matchmakers are employing. That a fighter like Fatuma, still a serviceable fighter, is only good up until a certain point, and Tatiana has a high enough ceiling that this is a manageable situation. A decent enough opponent to get her some rounds in the bank, get her back out there, and get her back in the winner's bracket. It's unfortunate that it's taken this long to get her back out there, close to a year's time, 11 months. I'm not sure. Perhaps Tatiana wanted the extra time off to work on things behind the scenes, away from the prying eyes of the boxing community. They certainly miscalculated when it came to that Jessica Gonzalez fight. On paper, Tatiana was a shoo-in to win that thing, but who knew that Jessica Gonzalez was going to bring it the way that she brought it? It was the activity and come-forwardness, the aggression of Jessica Gonzalez, as I recall, that flustered Tatiana Zrazhevskaya. Perhaps Tatiana had grown accustomed to getting a certain level of respect from her opponents, and Jessica Gonzalez, as we all know, she's tough. It's very similar to what we saw more recently between Sandy Ryan and Erica Farias, where Sandy looked like a fighter that was accustomed to getting a certain level of respect whenever she lands a shot, and the come-forwardness and aggression of the woman opposite the ring flustered her. She wasn't used to that. She wasn't used to somebody bringing the fight to her. That's what happened between Tatiana and Jessica. In truth, I wouldn't mind seeing those 2 run it back. Jessica Gonzalez, who's coming right off that loss to Yuli Hangluna, the bantamweight division's WBC champion. They had their rematch. They ran it back. and Yuli Hangluna avenged the loss she suffered to Jessica some years ago. I wouldn't mind seeing Jessica run it back with Tatiana. See if Tatiana can avenge that loss to Jessica the way that Yuli Hangluna avenged her loss to Jessica. For now, Tatiana is set to return to action later on this month on the 19th against Fatuma. And I'm glad she's back because she is one of the more promising fighters at or around these weights. It's not the end of the world that she suffered a loss so early in her career. Oftentimes, that results in a better fighter.
Better fighter without a false sense of confidence who knows they've got to work for it.
Can't look past anybody, and you can't be asleep at the wheel. Keep your eyes peeled later on this month for the ring return of Russia's own Tatiana Zrazhevskaya. In men's featherweight news, per a tweet from Michael Benson, Eddie Hearn has revealed that they're trying to make Leigh Wood versus Mauricio Lara for late September. And this is indicative of something. This is indicative of how lopsided the split is and how little Leigh Wood stands to make from that mandated Leo Santa Cruz fight.
If you look a little deeper, it's almost as if the WBA was colluding with the Leo Santa Cruz side of things.
Colluding with Leo, colluding with the PBC to ensure that Leo Santa Cruz doesn't end up boxing as part of a Matchroom show on the DAZN side of things. It's a 75-25 split, you understand.
That means if it goes to a purse bid and somebody places a bid, wins the rights to the fight, Leigh Wood is only entitled to 25% of whatever's in the pot.
In order for him to make anything substantial from the fight, a substantial amount of money would have to be poured into the pot, perhaps so much money that it ends up exceeding the fight's market value.
Then the fight ends up being more trouble than it's worth.
Which works out pretty well for Leo Santa Cruz, the absentee champion who hasn't defended that WBA featherweight title in approximately 3.5 years.
He's not on the hook, and he doesn't have to face Leigh Wood as his mandatory challenger. He can move forward with his plan to take on Ray Vargas, this division's WBC champion.
And his PBC stablemate. There are two alphabet titles at featherweight on the PBC side of things. Leo Santa Cruz's WBA title and Ray Vargas's WBC title.
And right before this order from the WBA came down, Leo Santa Cruz had an expressed interest in unifying titles with Ray Vargas.
Hey, listen, I told you from the beginning, from the very beginning, I don't think Leigh Wood is going to get the chance to box Leo Santa Cruz for that WBA title. I find it hard to imagine that Leigh Wood would cross over to the PBC side of things or Leo Santa Cruz would cross over to the Matchroom side of things. I just didn't see the fight happening.
You know what I figured? I figured that Matchroom internally would make a fight between Leigh Wood and Josh Warrington.
Josh Warrington, this division's reigning IBF champion, who reclaimed the IBF title from then-champion Kiko Martinez in his last fight. He's been recuperating from having suffered a broken jaw in that fight. I half expected to see Leigh Wood versus Josh Warrington next, but as it stands, Eddie Hearn has said Josh Warrington will have to defend his IBF featherweight world title versus mandatory challenger Luis Alberto Lopez next.
Josh Warrington is not at liberty to defend his red belt voluntarily against Leigh Wood.
Enter Mauricio Lara, who's in the market for a big name and a big fight. This fight would presumably take place in the United Kingdom on the heels of Leigh Wood's big win over Mick Conlan.
On the face of it, it doesn't look like Eddie Hearn's doing Leigh Wood any favors, putting him in there with an animal like Mauricio Lara.
You guys saw what he did to Josh Warrington. You know what kind of punching power this guy's got. You saw in the Leigh Wood versus Mick Conlan fight. Early goings of that fight, Mick Conlan sat Leigh Wood on his back pocket. Mick Conlan, skilled boxer that he might be, he's not a big puncher. So if Mick Conlan can sit you on your back pocket, what will Mauricio Lara do to you?
Why is Eddie Hearn putting Leigh Wood in the ring with this guy? Why is he trying to?
I'll tell you what I think. I think he wants to put Leigh Wood in a big enough fight, an interesting enough fight, that it draws a crowd. Because I think Leigh Wood likely stands to make more. Fighting Bronco Lara in the United Kingdom as part of a Matchroom show, he stands to make more from that than he'd make boxing Leo Santa Cruz at just 25% of the pot.
Emphasis on 25% of the pot. That's the split.
Whatever the size of the pot, Leigh Wood doesn't stand to gain much from it.
He'd likely stand to make more boxing on a Matchroom show where he'd be the A-side fighter.
But not just any Matchroom show, a good enough show, an attractive enough fight
that people want to see it. And people over there in the United Kingdom, they're familiar with Bronco Lara. They know what he can do. They saw what he did to Josh Warrington. Look at how many people showed up to see the rematch. Granted that Josh Warrington was the driving force for sales, but better still, those people in attendance, they knew who Lara was and they knew what he could do. That's why there was such a big turnout for the rematch, to see if Josh Warrington can avenge the loss. Fortunately, the fight ended before it actually got to turn into a fight due to a clash of heads, a rather ignominious end to a fight that a lot of people were waiting for. At minimum, we know that Mauricio Lara is a devastating puncher, and Lee Wood is a hard puncher himself. You put those two together, you're going to get an all-action shootout that likely doesn't go the distance. So let's be honest, Mauricio Lara has the edge in power. Mauricio Lara's likely going to be the favorite in that fight. This isn't exactly a safer alternative to a Leo Santa Cruz fight. You know, one thing I do give to Eddie Hearn is he matches his boys and girls tough. He doesn't protect them. He puts them in sink-or-swim situations. Interesting fights. Interesting matches that draw a crowd. This would be one among them. Lee Wood versus Mauricio Lara is a fight that more than likely ends in a knockout. But that is what I think is going on. The split for the Leo Santa Cruz fight is so lopsided. So lopsided that Lee Wood likely stands to make more money staying on his own side of things and taking his chances with Mauricio Lara. Now, whether or not you guys condemn nor condone that, I'll leave such judgments up to you, but that is what I think is going on. Making Mauricio Lara an option, I also heard that Kiko Martinez is in the running as well. Meanwhile, Josh Warrington will have to defend his IBF featherweight world title versus his mandatory challenger, Luis Alberto Lopez. Let me tell you something. This guy's no slouch. Josh Warrington is under grave threat of losing the red belt. Luis Alberto Lopez sports a professional record of 25 wins, 2 losses with no draws, 14 knockouts, having never been stopped. You might be familiar with Luis Alberto Lopez. He fights on a lot of top-ranked cards. This guy Josh Warrington's about to fight is a very fucking dangerous guy. You might be familiar with Luis Lopez. You might have seen him battering unbeaten Gabriel Flores, then unbeaten Gabriel Flores last year. This guy, he dropped a decision to the very skilled Ruben Villa in 2019, and he's won 8 fights since then. He's on an 8-fight winning streak, winning 6 of those fights by way of knockout, collecting the scalps of 3 unbeaten fighters along the way. Collecting the scalps of unbeaten Christian Baez, unbeaten Gabriel Flores, who I just mentioned, Isaac Lowe, more recently in December of last year. He's coming off a win over Raul Chirino. Stopped that guy in 4 rounds. He's got this Jason Vargas fight coming up on the undercard. It's later on this month on the undercard of Navarrete versus Baez. This guy is a high-risk, low-reward guy. This guy's a hot potato, but this guy's also a mandatory challenger, and Josh Warrington is faced with a choice. It's fight or flight. It's either he's going to fight this guy or he's going to surrender the red belt, surrender the IBF title. Because of how both boys go about fighting a fight, this promises to be an all-action shootout, as neither man can be accused of being gun-shy. I know that Josh Warrington is a volume puncher, perhaps not that big on power, though he's very big on activity. That's what makes him such a fun fighter to watch. That's what's made him so popular over the years. And Luis Lopez, yeah, he's not gun-shy at all, and he actually has power. Won 6 of his last 8 fights by way of knockout. All he's got to do is make it past Jason Vargas. Which point, Josh Warrington is going to have to either fight him or surrender the red belt to him. The implications of Luis Lopez potentially unseating Josh Warrington as this division's reigning IBF champion are as followed. He wins that fight, he takes that belt back over to the top-ranked side of things, where he can then unify it with the winner of Navarrete versus Baez. You have to wonder what Josh Warrington's going to do. Is he going to do what he did before when the IBF ordered him to fight Kid Galahad for a second time? Is he going to drop the title? Is he going to drop the belt, or will he so decide to defend it? If he does, he's got a live one in front of him. To be honest, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Luis Lopez knock out Josh Warrington. That could happen. All Luis has got to do is make it past Jason Vargas, a journeyman-level opponent with losses in the double digits who's coming off of a loss. If he does that, there's going to be hell to pay. Finally, in men's super middleweight news, ahead of his upcoming trilogy with Canelo Alvarez, Gennady Golovkin was quoted as saying, "Beating Canelo would be the biggest win of my career. Very fulfilling." In the hearts and minds of a lot of people, Gennady Golovkin won that first fight. Even though the official result was a draw, to a lot of people, Gennady Golovkin was more than deserving of the decision in their first outing, in their first fight. A lot of time has passed, and we are different fighters now, Golovkin told the Las Vegas Review-Journal. It's it's the right approach to move on, not to look back at the previous two fights and train with this idea that it is a separate fight. I'm sure it's not going to be an easy fight. My opponent is a champion. He has 4 belts, and he's arguably the best fighter at that weight. I'm jumping to the weight class for the first time, and I'm fighting the best fighter in that weight class. Most likely, I'll feel fresh in that weight category.
I think I'll be ready from the physical standpoint. I think I'll feel more comfortable in that weight class. On the other hand, I should say I feel extremely comfortable at 160 pounds.
This goes back to what I told you before. Not having to cut the extra 8 to make middleweight,
As his upcoming fight with Canelo Alvarez is a super middleweight contest. That might leave Gennady Golovkin feeling a bit fresher than he usually feels, having to cut all the way down to 160 pounds, a weight that he's made many times over for many years. Not having to cut the extra 8 might leave...
he won't be as depleted.
Can't be easy for an aging fighter, an aging champion who's 40 years old, to have to cut all the way down to 160 pounds when he's been doing it for so long. There is that to consider, though there are other aspects of the fight.
You know, you don't get faster as you get older. Your reaction time slows, whether you want it to or not.
And there is very little that anyone can do about that. Hand-eye coordination and reflexes, response time, these all degrade over time.
There are a lot of people that are romanticizing Gennady Golovkin and romanticizing this fight, still thinking about their initial meeting, their initial fight.
Likely still feeling raw about the fight's outcome, about the fight's result and how it was scored. Judges scored it a draw, where most people, myself included, feel that Gennady Golovkin won the fight, that he did enough to deserve the decision. Though hard feelings aside, that has no bearing on today's fight, today's meeting between these two fighters, between these two combatants.
I don't have any illusions as far as what's about to happen to Gennady Golovkin. He's not the same fighter that he was 5 or 6 years ago.
He hasn't found the fountain of youth, and he's not Benjamin Button. Since having fought Canelo Alvarez at least 2 times, their second fight being a war, the war that he had with Sergey Derevyanchenko, and the physically taxing fight he just had earlier this year with Ryota Murata, I don't see a fighter that can pull it off. I don't see a fighter that I think beats Canelo Alvarez at 168 pounds at a time when Canelo Alvarez is very angry, very frustrated. Having dropped that decision to Dmitry Bivol, he's likely looking to make a statement.
He's likely looking to get back in the winner's bracket and in a big way.
I don't feel too bad for Gennady Golovkin because he has made some very shrewd business decisions over the years. He's made a lot of money. Money from the Jacobs pay-per-view, the Canelo pay-per-views, his deal with DAZN. He's made a killing.
He's made an obscene amount of money for the fights that he's had on the DAZN platform.
And he is about to make more. So while I do think he's under grave threat of being stopped for the first time in his career, don't feel too bad for him. He's being paid handsomely.
The bottom line here is that this is not the Gennady Golovkin of old that shoots the jab 2 times the middleweight average.
It was that jab that caused Canelo Alvarez a lot of problems. I don't think this Gennady Golovkin has the activity and the reaction time to keep Canelo off of him.
There really is no shame in Gennady getting older, but there are consequences.